turn, but we may or may not do that. But anyway, good to have you guys all with me. Matt, why don't you just give me the high sign when we're going to start broadcasting, okay? Oh, okay, perfect. So, 10-4. Matt Bailey knew who I was talking to. Thank you, Matt. All right, so we have been going through a study by Dr. Brooker called The Scarlet Thread Throughout Every Book in the Bible. And we have made it through all the way through the Old Testament, from Genesis all the way to Malachi. And this week we are going to start the New Testament. And instead of just going one gospel at a time, talking about each gospel, one of the things I'd like to do is the gospels all tell the same story, just from a different perspective. So what I'd like to do is kind of a harmony of the gospels, going through all four of them at the same time for the next few weeks. And we're basically going to break the four gospels up into four parts. The first part being the birth of Christ. The second part being his growth, his early ministry, his 3.5 years when he was teaching the disciples. That'll be the second part. The third part being that last week, right before the crucifixion, because so many things happened during that last week that's recorded in the four gospels. And then the last thing is going to be his resurrection through his ascension. And we're actually going to touch into Acts chapter 1, all the way from the end of the Gospels to Acts chapter 1 when we talk about that study. But before we actually dig into the Gospels themselves, I wanted to give you guys a little introduction to the four Gospels. So I'm going to present. You guys will still be able to hear me, but you won't be able to see me. Let me know when you guys can see this. Awesome. Barely? Wonder. Matt, I wonder if you can highlight. Let's see if we can make it a little bigger. Can you make the presentation portion bigger, Matt? I don't know if I can do it on my end. I don't think I can. No, because that would be inconvenient, Miss Vicky. I appreciate the offer, but let me see if I can do something here on this end. Hold on. Let me zoom in here. Getting better? There we go. All right. Can you guys see it better now? All right, good deal. So, introductions to the four Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So, first of all, what I found interesting is they were all written at different times. So, Matthew is actually the earliest of the Gospels, written in AD 39 through 45 in Aramaic, and then retranslated in AD 60 to 65 in Greek. Mark was written in AD 55 to 61, Luke AD 63 to 67, and the Gospel of John, which we thought was the first one written, was actually the last one written in AD 90 to 100. Matthew was in Israel, in Palestine, when he wrote his. Mark was in Egypt and sometimes in Rome. Luke was in Rome, and John was in Ephesus when he wrote his gospel. Now, here's where we were talking about different perspectives. You guys remember that last week? You guys brought up the idea of the car crash. We'll get to that later. But not only was it written for different perspectives, it was written for different audiences. So Matthew was written for the Jews. Mark was written for the Romans. Luke was written for the Greeks. John was written for the whole world. Matthew starts out with the genealogy of Christ. Mark starts out with the John the Baptist out in the wilderness. Luke starts out with the offerings at Christ's birth. And John starts out all the way back at the beginning of the world. And then here are the different ways that each of the Gospels portrayed Jesus. Matthew started out the book of Matthew portrays Christ as the king. The book of Mark is the conqueror of the devil and the miracle worker, miracle maker. Luke is a friend of mankind, the sacrifice and the priest. And John is the incarnate word of God. Christ came to fulfill the law, to perform miracles, to save humanity, and to dwell among us. Matthew used prophecies. He expounded upon the prophecies that were that came before and that we just studied in the Old Testament. Mark, he elaborated and he focused on the works of Jesus. Luke, he went back to the history of the Jewish people. And John focused on the divinity of Jesus. And then they each kind of focused on different things. Matthew was kind of the image of Christ was the face of a man, the king. In Mark, he was seen as the face of a lion, which is his strength. In Luke, it was the face of an ox, which was to signify his offering on the cross. And then in John, it was the face of an eagle, his divinity, focused on his divinity. So, all right, this is kind of what we talked about last time. You guys see this picture? So we got 4 different people, and they're watching this accident happen from 4 different perspectives. Now, Shelley watched the accident, and she said that the blue car ran into the car in front of it because she was behind the blue car. Mary, who was in the car in front, said, no, the car in front, my car, slammed on brakes and the blue car hit me. Mike, who was off to the side, said that the car in front hit its brakes. The blue car did not hit its brakes, but that's because Mike was off to the side. He did not see the blue car hit its brakes. Greg was behind the blue car, but he was able to see the whole thing. He said that the car in front hit the brakes, the car behind hit the brakes, and it was just an accident. You know, cat ran across the road or whatever. So they all had different perspectives on the same accident. Okay? The Gospels are the same way. So, actually, I think I got these switched on accident. Yep, I did. I got some of these switched from above, but that's all right. Anyway, so Matthew is considering him the king of Judah, the Lion of Judah. Revelation 5:5, and one of the elders said unto me, weep not. Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, has prevailed to open the book and has loosed the 7 seals. So here, Matthew is focusing on him being the King of Kings. And then Mark is focusing on him being a servant, but he made himself of no reputation and took upon himself the form of a servant and was made in the likeness of men. Luke is focusing on his humanity. But when the fullness of time was come, God sent forth his son, made of a woman, made under the law. So he was human, just like us. And then John was focusing on his divinity. Therefore, the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and you shall call his name Emmanuel, God with us. So that's the idea. The Gospels are viewing Christ from 4 different views. Okay? I thought this was interesting. Matthew, before he was saved, was a tax collector. Mark didn't have a job. He was a young man. Luke was a medical doctor, and John was a fisherman. So you have all different walks of life there. Also, Matthew, Mark, and John were Jews. Luke was a Gentile. He was a Greek. Matthew and John were apostles, while Mark and Luke served with the apostles. They were close friends and workmen with the apostles. We already went over this. Jewish, Roman, Greek. Okay. Matthew was interested in signs. Luke was interested in wisdom. Matthew focused on unbelievers. Mark to believers. Luke and John to unbelievers. That's just going over what we talked about before. Here's another thing that I thought was interesting. The arrangement of the gospel. Matthew is more topical and John is more topical, versus Mark and Luke are chronological. They go straight through Jesus's life. So I thought that was interesting. Let's see. Matthew goes from birth to resurrection. Mark starts at his ministry to his resurrection. Luke and John are from his ministry to, well, Luke is from birth. I don't know why it says ministry there, because Luke talks about his birth. But anyway. All right. Here's another thing that I thought would be interesting. Old Testament quotations. There are 53 in Matthew, 36 in Mark, 25 in Luke, and 20 in John. And then that's actual quotations. Then the references, Matthew had 129 references, Mark 63, 67 for Luke, and 125 for John. So you can see these guys, even though not all of them were Jewish, they all leaned heavily on all those prophecies we were just talking about last week or the week before last. So I just thought that would be interesting, kind of an introduction into the 4 Gospels. Does anybody have any comments, thoughts? All right, quiet bunch this morning. Yes, sir. Okay. Okay. Actually, that's something I'm going to look it up to make sure I'm right. I don't want to just spit it out. I'm pretty sure I am with my knowledge here, but I'm not 100% sure. Any other questions while I'm looking this up? So Matthew, Mark, and Luke are referred to as the synoptic gospels because they include many of the same stories, often in similar sequence with similar or sometimes identical wording. This stands in contrast to the Gospel of John, whose content is largely distinct. So, does that answer your question? So Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they say a lot of the same things, sometimes using exactly the same words, a lot of the same situations, same sequence of events. Whereas John, since he was writing in a more topical format, may have gotten things a little out of order from the other ones, because he is focusing on the topic of Christ's divinity as opposed to trying to get things straight and in order. chronologically. All right. Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. Well, the order that they came in, as you can see, was pretty much in the order that they were written: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, time wise. So they kind of just put them in order in from the years that they were written, Miss Vicky. So I don't think there's anything substantial or significant about it being Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, other than the date they were written that I know of. I have never heard any studies or anything about uh, Matthew having prominence or anything like that. No. However, you are correct that there was a significant conversation when the 12 disciples were originally chosen. There was a conversation about some of them, Matthew being one on that. Why in the world why are you eating with sinners? Why are you going to these sinners' houses? Why are you choosing sinners to be your disciples? Why aren't you going to the religious elite, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the scribes? Why aren't you picking people from the political mainstream, so to speak? Why didn't you go to Caiaphas and ask him to be one of your disciples? So yeah, there was a lot of discussion as to why Jesus chose the disciples that he did. And one of those discussions was definitely about Matthew, with him being a tax collector, because in those times, the tax collectors were collecting taxes for the oppressors, and so they were considered traitors to the Jewish people. So for Jesus to welcome a traitor into his inner circle was a big deal at the time. Absolutely, good point. That's exactly right. Matter of fact, Jesus himself said that he did not come to heal those who are healthy. He came to heal those who were sick. And he said that to the Pharisees one time when they asked him why didn't he come to the Pharisees and present himself to the Pharisees to be accepted as the Messiah. Jesus was basically saying, I came for the people, for the sinners, not for you guys. You guys think you're good, you think you're holy, but he had a lot of choice words for those guys, didn't he? So next week, we're going to focus pretty much exclusively on John chapter 1 and Luke chapter 2 and Matthew chapter 2. We're going to get started with the before he was born and what we call the Advent, the birth of Christ, next week. So you guys read up, have a little Christmas in September, and let's be ready to talk about the birth of Christ next week. All right? Yes, sir. That was just the date that I found. We can do some more research, Tracy, and definitely look into it. Understood. No, we can look into it. Maybe the references I found were incorrect. That's a definite possibility. Yes. Yeah, the Gospel of John was written when he was in Ephesus. That much we do know, yes. Yeah. Yep, he did. He sure did. He never says I, John. He says the disciple whom Jesus loved. That yeah, it is a true statement. Uh, John was in the inner circle. James, John, and oh shoot, I just lost Peter. Peter, James, and John were the top three, so to speak. That is true. Yeah, absolutely. I think it was more of a kind of like a pet name. It wasn't meant to say that Jesus loved him the most. It was just kind of a pet name, like dear or sweetheart or something like that. It wasn't intended for John to act like he was the best of all or loved the most of all. It was a term of endearment, so to speak. And John, for whatever reason, did not wish to overly present himself when he was writing this perspective of the Gospels, because his point was Jesus is God. His point was not, hey, I knew this guy. It was, that Jesus was God. That was what he wanted to bring out. And so nowadays we like to make things more than they are sometimes. But I believe it was just a term of endearment that he had, almost like a nickname, you know, teddy bear, sweetheart, or, whatever, something like that. So, all right. Any other questions, thoughts? Yeah. All right, guys. I love you. I look forward to talking with y'all next week. And we will have fun um, looking at the scarlet thread, looking at all those Old Testament prophecies that led up to Jesus's birth. So we're going to pull together the Old Testament and draw it straight into the New Testament next week. All right. I will not be back until the 29th, till the end of the month. All right. Thank you, guys. Love you all.